All right, welcome to the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. I'm Olgun, going solo today. Usually I have Ken Pittman by my side. He has TV obligations out in Bristol, Connecticut. That was stuff that he could not get out of, and so we considered not even doing the podcast. But I felt as though we needed to talk about the Game 3s that we just saw. We now have a championship series set, but let's talk about how we got there. This is largely just going to be me just spouting off a bunch of thoughts on the game and some little tidbits heading into the championship series. So the first game, it was Melbourne United getting the win over the Perth Wildcats, 113-112, in one of the most incredible bouts of shot making you'll ever see. So if you haven't seen that game, go and watch it. And then last night in Wollongong, it was the Illawarra Hawks with an absolute shellacking of the South East Melbourne Phoenix. That was a 30-point win that at one point was 40 points. Go watch that too, because that is the greatest offensive team in NBL history, looking exactly like that against a Phoenix team that I think looked a little bit scared that day for some reason. We'll talk about that Illawarra Southeast Game 3 a little bit later, but to start off, we'll focus on that Perth-Melbourne game, because not only was it one of the best sort of showings of shot making that I think we've ever seen in the NBL, but it's one of the best games that you'll ever see. The shot making made it so entertaining. It started with Bryce Cotton, went to Ian Clark, Chris Golding, and then Christian Doolittle did his thing. But it was just an incredible basketball game that went back and forth. You couldn't pick who was going to win it. There were controversial calls at the end, but we will talk about that. But we'll start by just talking about the numbers, because they're impressive in their own right. And so you go through the box score, and you have Christian Doolittle finish with 37, 10, and 5. Bryce Cotton had 33 points and 6 assists. Over on Melbourne's side, off the bench, Ian Clark had 38 points, including 6 3-pointers. He kept Melbourne in that game in the second quarter. And then Chris Golding, 30 points, hit 9 3-pointers, hit the game-winning free throw at the end of the game. And watching those four basically trade buckets for the entire game, and then one team pulling out at the end, was just incredible. We'll talk about the end of that game. There were some missed calls. We'll talk about those. The Jesse Wagstaff 3. Of course it was going to be Jesse Wagstaff hitting that shot. It was the Wildcats down 3 with about 24, 25 seconds to go. They had a bunch of chances to tie the game. It was Christian Doolittle getting a really good look on that right wing. Perth O-board. Bryce Cotton, really good look on that right wing. Perth O-board, and then they swing to Jesse Wagstaff, who hit that 3, tied it at 112. It looked like this game was going to go to overtime. One more possession. Melbourne United with about 3 or 4 seconds to go. They ran the exact same action, practically, that they had run twice already this season, where Matthew Delvedova catches it on the low block, and then they have Chris Golding setting that back pick. And there are so many wrinkles out of that it's such a tough guard. You don't know if Chris Golding is going to set that and then curl out. You don't know if, like what happened against Sydney earlier in the season, he's going to set that, Jack White's going to slip to the rim. In this case, it was Chris Golding faking the back pick, back cutting Ben Henschel, and ultimately getting fouled on a layup attempt. The Wildcats reviewed that. They challenged that. It was unsuccessful. You don't blame them for challenging that one. It was, I think, no matter what, Chris would have made the first one and then missed the second. So I don't know if the timeout would have really mattered. I don't know if the Wildcats would have gotten the timeout had they not challenged it and just let Chris shoot the free throws. But Chris Golding made a free throw, missed the second one. Dylan Windler got the rebound. I don't think his shot got off on time, but it was way off anyway. Melbourne United wins that game. We'll talk about a few things. Chris Golding's shot making is outrageous. He showed it in game 1, where he hit 10 threes against the Perth Wildcats. He did it in game 3 as well. The shot making is just so incredible. And in this game was interesting because the defense wasn't that bad. Yeah, there were times where a big maybe wasn't at the level, when a guy was coming off a curl, off an on-ball, off a handoff. Maybe someone chasing the shooter would lose him for a split second, but it wasn't that bad. This was just incredible shot making. And Chris Golding, I think, is the pinnacle of that. As far as tough shots, Chris Golding is one of, if not the best, the NBL has ever seen. And as far as world basketball goes, Chris Golding is absolutely up there as far as the best shot makers in the world right now when it comes to shooting tough shots. every shot he takes is absolutely backbreaking. There was, I think, his 9 3-pointer where it came off an O board, swing, shoots it from about 30 feet. Dylan Windler thought he got a hand on it. I think he turned to his teammates and did like this motion, like, hey, I got a hand on that. This will probably go short. The shot goes in, and at that point, you look at the Wildcats bench and they're just despondent. What do you do at that point? So that was incredible. Ian Clark's shot making the first half was incredible too. The Perth Wildcats got out to a 14-point lead, and it looked like man, like, are they about to sink United? And United's not going to have the opportunity to get their redemption. But Ian Clark came out, hit a lot of tough threes, some deep threes, really kept them in the game. And Bryce Cotton in that first half was special. I think he got a lot of favorable calls, but he also did a good job, and I think John really did a good job of having him come off on balls really high up, and so the big wasn't really at the level, and so he was able to sort of step into those threes, and that the hand wasn't there in time. So, credit to everyone there, and then I think Christian Doolittle. It reminded me of Will Magnay's playing game against the Illawarra Hawks last season, where he looked like Superman, where no one on the court could match him physically. That's what Christian Doolittle looked like in this one. 37 points, 10 rebounds. He got to whatever spot he wanted, and he would either raise up over you or he would finish through you. Christian Doolittle is such a unique player in the NBL. No one can match up with him physically. You can't put a big on him because he's faster than you. You can't put Jack White on him because he's taller and stronger than you. So he's such a unique matchup, and I thought he got to his spots really well. It's a shame that sort of Herculean effort came in a loss. But obviously someone had to lose that game, and you didn't want, Chris Golding and Ian Clark's Herculean efforts to come in a loss too. But Christian Doolittle definitely deserves a lot of credit for his performance. And then I think Jack White deserves credit, because in game 2, there was a lot of criticism, and quite rightly. He had the yips. He couldn't make a free throw. He got to the line and everything was between the ears. And he came out, he made his first free throw. It sort of bounced up. It got like 5 feet in the air and then came back down, but he made the free throw. But he hit 4 really big threes that seemed like they all came in big moments too. It was when the Wildcats were maybe going on a run, or they were maybe about to stretch the lead, and he was able to keep United within distance. He had 15 points, 9 rebounds. That was really, really impressive from him. Another person who I think deserves a lot of credit, who I don't know if he gets enough of it, is Dean Vickerman, and I think that whole coaching staff, and I think Matthew Dellavedova, because we speak about the shot making of Chris Golding and Ian Clark, but some of the sets that they're running and some of the wrinkles they have off of them, you need high IQ, high-level basketball players in the middle of those things. And yes, Chris Golding creates some unique and a hell of a lot of gravity, but Delly made a lot of great reads. Is Chris Golding about to flare? Will Chris or Ian, will they curl to the bucket? Is the big cheating there, and is my big slipping? I think Dean Vickerman, Delly, I think they did a really good job putting the Wildcats in a lot of creative actions that ultimately got them baskets. And I think Delly is a really unique person to have as the head of the snake of Dean Vickerman's system. And also the final possession. I don't know if you can have that situation where it's Delly in the low block and Chris Golding as the guy who's going to basically backcut Ben Henschel before Delly even catches the ball. You need 2 veterans in that situation. And credit to Delly, he averaged 11 assists over the course of the series. That is really, really impressive. So credit to him, credit to Dean Vickerman and his staff for the sort of actions they were running. I thought they were really creative. It's bittersweet for the Wildcats because they were really good. They performed really well. Yeah, you can point to some of the defensive breakdowns here or there. Someone maybe not at the level. Keanu Pinder, I think, probably had a series he'd like to forget. But this was largely a really good performance from the Perth Wildcats. This felt like a championship series. And I think that says a lot about that team. We now, as far as the Wildcats go, look to what they're going to look like next year, where we'll see what Jesse Wagstaff does. If he chooses to retire, he's still at the level. If he wants to keep playing, he is still a functional NBL player, obviously. Bryce Cotton will obviously be the big question. The feel remains that he will go elsewhere. Japan remains where all the smoke is, but We will see what happens. There are other NBL teams who are ready to pounce on him. They're preparing their offers, and Bryce and his people will listen to those offers. So I think there's a chance, and probably more chance than not, that Bryce is somewhere else next season. And so when you look at that roster, it's very bare. They came into last offseason with their roster largely filled. That's not the case this time. They have to fill their roster, and there is like a ray of sunshine if Bryce does leave. If Bryce goes, obviously the preference is always to keep Bryce Cotton. He's probably the greatest NBL player of all time, probably. Him and Andrew Gaze, right? But the flip side is, if you don't have Bryce Cotton, you have that allotted money that you could spend on 2 all NBL first team level guys, and that's a really valuable thing to have. And so I think the Wildcats will be fine either way. They will spend a lot. They spent a lot this season. They'll do it again, whether it's with Bryce Cotton or not. But we'll wait and see what decision he makes. Ben Henschel will be an interesting one. There's a lot of interest in him around the league. We'll see what happens with his draft situation first. But there's a lot of interest around the NBL in Ben Henschel and his skill set, which I think is really unique for a young player in the NBL. Perth wants him back. They're engaged in talks, but we'll see what happens there. I don't see Keanu Pinder back. That feels like a mutual parting of ways that will end up happening there. He's off contract. And the Wildcats really want to keep Christian Doolittle. And after that game 3, it makes a lot of sense. It still feels like Doolittle will explore his sort of international market, but the Wildcats want him. There is some mutual interest there in him staying. Let's talk about the foul calls, or at least the missed calls at the end of that game 3. The missed goaltend on that Ben Henschel layup attempt, a pretty egregious miss. If you're an NBL official, you can't miss that. And then a few possessions later, Ian Clark had Ben Henschel on an island, just in front of the halfway line. He clearly picks up his pivot foot, travels before a drive to the rim and a layup. Now, I think what's so egregious about them was that they were very material. A missed goaltend is a missed 2 points. A missed travel is a missed possession. So the Wildcats were, and there are also objective calls too. This wasn't like, oh, that was a block charge that we can disagree on. No, a goaltend was a goaltend, a travel's a travel. And so the Wildcats were absolutely robbed of 2 points and a possession. Now, that is significant. Would the outcome have been swung? Potentially. We don't know. You could also argue that Bryce Cotton got a lot of favorable calls in the first half, which I think he did, that United did not get. The Wildcats shot more free throws. Melbourne United committed more fouls. There was a possession late in the game where United had a run out. Chris Golding went for a layup, and I think it was pretty clear that Jesse Wagstaff fouled him. That wasn't called. So these calls swing both ways. Those 2 calls were obviously highlighted and magnified because of, I think, how material they were. But these are just refs making mistakes. There is nothing more than that. Anyone who suggests that this is part of a grand cabal, a big conspiracy, is unfortunately an idiotic position to hold. It doesn't stand up logically, unfortunately. I don't know if there's much more to say on that, but credit to both teams in this one. Melbourne United, I think, was the better team all season, so it feels fine that they're the team that advances. But this did feel like a championship series. Whoever got through in that semi-final series, I think, would have provided a significant challenge for whomever got through the next night. Now, the next night is a game that I was at, Illawarra Hawks versus South East Melbourne Phoenix, and it was an interesting atmosphere going into it, because up until that point, Illawarra had put together one good quarter. It was the third quarter of game 1 where they went on that 21-0 run and they basically stole the game. Beyond that, they had looked pretty ordinary, unfortunately. And so there was a feeling going into it, even among like the spectators in attendance, that, hey, this feels, we're nervous. The team feels nervous. So that was really interesting going into it. And by the same token, Phoenix are going to it thinking, we have like a free swing of sorts. It wasn't long until that was no longer the case. The Illawarra Hawks came out with a bang. Trey Kell was aggressive with his shooting, with getting 2 feet in the paint. And by halftime, it was a 25-plus point lead that stretched out to 30 points, that stretched out to 40 points. This was just a matter of the Illawarra Hawks absolutely looking like what they had been all season, which is the best offensive team we've ever seen, and having weapons everywhere from their two import point guards, the two All-NBL first-team guys in Trey Kell and Tyler Harvey, and then everyone who comes to the party. Wani Swakala-Bullock hitting a big three early on. Hyungjung Lee coming on, hitting a turnout three on his first touch of the game. Todd Blanchfield hitting 8 threes. I think he had 6 threes in game one. So they have so many weapons that they can throw at you. And they did a really good job defensively with their physicality. This was not a matter of the Phoenix not being able to play offense or keep up with the Illawarra Hawks, right? They weren't going to do that. They weren't able to get their guys going. The physicality the Hawks played with was really, really impressive. It seemed like every Matt Hurt catch was from 25 feet out. And as soon as he put the ball on the floor, they'd send a quick double and get the ball out of his hands or force a turnover. And it was interesting because at that point, it seemed like Hurt started to shoot worse and worse shots because he knew that, man, these aren't good quality touches I'm getting, so I'm going to get that ball up. And there was just no opportunity for the South East Melbourne Phoenix to really keep up. But as much as that was somewhat important, it was what they were doing defensively that was the issue, right? You can't keep up the score with a team like the Illawarra Hawks unless you're somewhat sound defensively, and they just weren't that. There were a lot of line drives from Illawarra's guards. I thought the Phoenix allowed 2 feet in the paint way too often. The amount of sort of drive and kickouts that the Hawks got was unbelievable, and those kickouts, Todd Blanchfield had 8 3-pointers. It was 8 of 10. Let's say like 8 of them were open, and that was just the nature of the lack of resistance from the perimeter guys on the South East Melbourne Phoenix, and Illawarra able to get 2 feet in the paint whenever they wanted. If I go through my notes on some of the other stuff in that game, there was a lot of overhelping of shooters throughout the entire game, whether it was Todd Blanchfield, Lockie Ulbrich would get 2 feet in the paint. Someone would help off Darius Days. You have guys helping off like Mason Peatling who get an extra pass to help off Peatling, extra pass to Trey Kell. This stuff can't happen. And then what became interesting was the Illawarra Hawks have been very conservative with some of their minutes. They're pretty deep, and they probably go the deepest as far as the teams in the playoffs. But we didn't see many minutes for Darius Days, Hyungjung Lee throughout the series. We saw them in this game because it felt like the Hawks got enough of a buffer that they can go and play those guys. And we saw a lineup that was Trey Kell, Tyler Harvey, Hyungjung Lee, Todd Blanchfield, Darius Days, an all offense lineup, 5 out. Usually you want someone in there who can guard. You want either Froling is in there as a big, Wani Swakala-Bullock, Dan Greta in there. Dan Greta was awesome this series. Yeah, he got ejected. He will play the next game. Usually you want one of those sort of defense first guys in there, but Tatum was okay with playing these 5 offensive dudes because everyone was flowing. The rhythm was there. And I think you can get away with that against a team like the Phoenix, who I think were on the back foot for the entirety of that game. And unfortunately, that game was over very, very early on. That scoreline ended up being 126-96, but I thought the Phoenix hit a lot of pretend buckets at the end to bring that back to not even a respectable margin, but not 40. But the Illawarra Hawks were 19 of 39 from 3, which would be impressive if Melbourne United didn't hit 23s the previous game. But it was incredible. There was a point when I checked the score sheet, end of the third quarter, the Hawks had an offensive rating of about 165, which for those who don't understand advanced data and how that stuff operates, that is an insane, unreachable number. Like no player or team would ever finish a season with an O rating that high. An O rating of 120 is outstanding. The fact that they were 165, they were scoring 165 points per 100 possessions through 3 quarters is a ridiculous rate of scoring. So honestly, credit to them. They it feels like they were waiting for an outburst like this. They are the best offensive team in the league. They were waiting for something like this. I think the Phoenix gave them a free swing early in the game, and then the Hawks were just feeling themselves from that point onwards. We now have a championship series. Illawarra Hawks versus Melbourne United. The Hawks were the number 1 seed. They have home court advantage. Game 1 is on Saturday evening in Wollongong. We now move to a 5-game series, which I think is obviously preferable. And we'll see what happens. It's interesting. Melbourne has been, consistently a top 2 defense over the course of the season. They had a bit in the middle of the season where they sort of tapered away, but they finished the season as a top 2 defense. So you basically have the best or one of the best defenses versus the best offense we've ever seen. And obviously the best offense in the league this season. Melbourne now has an opportunity to be a bit more traditional with how they guard. Yeah, you have Shea Ili, but Shea Ili did basically put the entirety of his focus into neutralizing Bryce Cotton in the prior series. We've seen times where Dean Vickerman has put Shea Ili on Tyler Harvey, basically neutralize that one guy, Delhi on Trey Kell, and see what happens from there. Basically use Shilly as a neutralizer instead of a primary point of attack guy. We've seen Shilly do that with Dejan Vasiljevic in the past, where you take him out of the game and the point guard can sort of roam how he wants, but if you take away that secondary scorer, you could be okay. It'll be fascinating to see how United treats the Illawarra Hawks, and it'll be interesting because they're more traditional. They have a big like Sam Froling, who was largely a bystander in this previous series because both teams had a tendency to go small. But I think United has a preference to play their bigs. Even when the Perth Wildcats went small throughout game 2 and 3, they wanted to figure out a way to attack that small ball lineup with their bigs on the floor. And so I think both teams will play their bigs. So what we didn't see from Sam Froling in this last series, just by nature of the matchup, I think we'll see tenfold in this upcoming series because of the matchup. I think the matchup is more preferable to Sam Froling. So we'll see a lot more of him. Can United, and we said this about their series against Perth, can they keep up? Ian Clark going for 38 in game 3 of that semi-final series was a really positive step. Having him being aggressive and confident does so much for this United offense. So they show that they can keep up with the Perth Wildcats, who entered that series as the second best offensive team of all time when it comes to their offensive rating. United showed they can keep up with them. Let's see if they can keep up with the Illawarra Hawks too. And then I think home court will matter. I've been in the Wynn Entertainment Centre a lot this season. The home court is real there. And it's not just the chance that they're going to throw at players. They've had a back and forth with Chris Golding over the course of the season. But they get really loud in there. And so the travel for United, we'll see how those older guys handle it. But then getting into that building, very similar to MyState Bank Arena in Tasmania, where they're on top of you. It'll be fascinating to see how they handle that. And who else shows up for United? Delhi was awesome as a creator, generally, in a semi-final series. Is there another scorer that needs to emerge? Will it be one of the bigs, now that it'll be a more traditional matchup against Sam Froling and Lockie Olbrich? And then for United, how do you handle the waves of different role guys that come off the bench for the Illawarra Hawks? You have Davo Hickey, who's going to run down your throat. Then you have Hyungjung Lee come on the floor, and they're immediately going to run some turnout stuff for him. So you have to be ready for that. Todd Blanchfield comes on, and he's feeling himself. He's playing the best basketball of his career at 32 or 33 in his 16th season in the NBL. Darius Days comes off the bench, and can you play him off the floor? I think he'll have a short leash. I think if Justin Tatum doesn't feel like he can contribute defensively, I'm not sure if Darius Days can stay on the floor. But what he brings you offensively, I think, can be really important. And so that'll be a fascinating thing to keep an eye on too. This will be a really good series. It feels similar to last season, where it's the two best teams in the league all season long who now get an opportunity to match up against each other. Differing styles when it comes to the best offense versus the best defense, but both teams have shown a propensity to push the pace and to run. So who wins that battle will be key to this matchup. We'll see Rob Lowe and Marcus Lee on the floor and probably look a little bit more comfortable because they're going up against a fellow big. So we'll see what happens. That series, game 1 tips off on Saturday. I think game 5, it'll go as late as I think March 28th was the date. But And there's every chance that this goes out to 5 games. But we'll see what happens there. So those were my sort of general thoughts on those 2 game threes that we saw. If you've got thoughts or if you disagree with anything I said or whatever, leave us a comment below. I know we got some stick for not putting like a news nugget of some sort at the end of last week's pod. So we can bring a little something to the table. I've had reporting that Chase Buford has shown interest in the Brisbane Bullets job. I'll stress that was the extent of what I reported, that Chase Buford was open to a return to the NBL, and that Brisbane Bullets, that Bacon head coach job left by Justin Schuler, was one that he was open to and interested in. Those 2 parties have connected, but it doesn't feel like that job will be his. He was never the front runner. So if you saw that somewhere, that was never true. That's never something I reported. It was just Buford having an interest. The Bullets did their due diligence in reaching out to Buford. It doesn't feel like the timelines will fit there. So as much as Buford was open to it, the overwhelming likelihood is that he will not be the head coach of the Brisbane Bullets. So that's one little thing there. And the other is the Cairns Taipans. Now, when Adam Ford decided to move on to bigger and better things, and I'll say this, the Taipans wanted to extend 40. They offered an extension to him, and I think he decided early on, I think before the season even began, that this would be his last season in Cairns. So when he decided to officially move on, and everyone knew that there was a vacancy there, they got a lot of incoming interest. They didn't even put feelers out. It was a lot of inbound interest, which I think is really impressive for a team that is a low-spend team, a community team that often finishes toward the bottom because of just their capacity to spend. But they had a lot of interest from incoming coaches. From what I understand, they're preparing for this coach search to stretch out a little bit. And the likelihood is that they enter free agency without a head coach in place. Now, they have Mark Beecroft there as their GM, and Adam Ford is there as an advisor of sorts. I don't think they've come up with an official title for what he's going to be, but he is someone who can sort of oversee the program. So they do have people in place, and they have basketball people in place to help with recruitment and things like that. But from what I understand, they are planning to go into free agency without a head coach. So that's something to keep track of. It'll be a little while before they insert a head coach there. I think that's all I've got. I think that's all I'm allowed to say at this point, as far as some little news things that are floating around. Obviously, with the Wildcats being ousted, I think the biggest story this offseason will be tracking Bryce Cotton and what his future might hold, whether that's in the NBL or otherwise. He's been in the NBL for 9 seasons. He's been arguably the best scorer we've ever seen in this league, 5-time MVP. What he does next is incredibly important to the future of this league and the future of the Perth Wildcats. So we'll see what happens there. This has been the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. We will catch you, I think, after game 1. Kane will be back, and we'll talk about everything we're seeing there. We're hoping to have some on-the-ground coverage from the Championship Series. I'll be at every game. So me and my producer, Alex, will be able to get some content from inside those arenas. So stay tuned for those as well. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe, all that jazz. Leave a comment below, your thoughts on the series, your thoughts on the upcoming series, and if you agree or disagree with anything I said. But this has been me talking for almost half an hour, so I'm going to leave everyone to it. I hope everyone has a good day, good week. Enjoy the Championship Series. See you guys.